folks. Welcome to episode number 10 of the Retro Wrestling Review Podcast. I'm your host, Gene Jackson, and this week we've got a special episode. We are going to veer away from 1993, at least for part of the episode, as we're going to talk a little bit about the July 13th, 1991 episode of USWA Championship Wrestling. And we're going to do that because we have a special guest. Joining us will be the former managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the host of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Of course, I'm going to be joined by none other than Mr. Bob Smith. And me and Bob have a conversation about a trip he made down to Memphis to the USWA in July of 1991. He actually was on that episode and got to be involved in a segment with Jerry the King Lawler and Leatherface. Pretty wild story, and he got to spend a few days in Tennessee and made it to a few different USWA shows. So we talked to Bob about that. We talk about all sorts of other fun retro wrestling related topics. And then a little later in the show, we're going to be joined by my second special guest. We're going to go back to our regular topic of 1993, and we're going to be joined by Dangerous Doug Gilbert, and he's going to tell us all about his feud with his brother, Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, that we've been covering in the recent episodes of the show. And he's also going to talk to us a little bit about his brand new podcast, Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert, that I'll be hosting. So we're going to talk about that. It's going to be a fun show. We got a lot to cover. So let's not waste any more time listening to me talk. Let's get right to it. Let's go and check out my interview with Bob Smith.
Hey, Gene.
Bob, how's it going, man? Excited to have you
great.
Here.
Hey, by the way, I want to congratulate you too. I was just scouring. I do this about once every 2 weeks. Scouring the Chartable charts, and you're doing good, man. Congratulations. Things seem to be percolating pretty good for your show here.
I appreciate it. I had several people tell me, like, man, nobody's going to listen to a podcast where we're reviewing old USWA episodes. And I was like, well, there's a 1,000,001 podcasts where they talk about 80s Memphis and Smoky Mountain and all this other stuff. And I don't think the USWA era gets enough love. So I'm going to do it. And if people listen, great. And if they don't, me and my friends will have fun. And I'll get to talk to cool people like, Wolfie D and Bob Smith. So I'm happy people are digging it. I'm happy people are watching. And I got to say, Bob, as a 47-year-old wrestling fan and reader and collector of Pro Wrestling Illustrated and all the aftermags over the years, I'm excited to have you here this week. But perhaps more importantly than that, as a guy born and raised in Mississippi, I may even be more excited to be podcasting with a man who shared the stage and performed with the late, great B.B. King. Man, what a life you've led, my friend.
Oh, my friend. Yeah, I'm very, very proud of that. We were legitimate friends, and I stepped in it, as they say. I got very, very lucky. I met him. I met him around, I'd say, 1994 for the first time, and I was still. After I left PWI, I started to go out on the road with my own blues band, and we did well enough that I got signed to a record label, and we made well, ostensibly it was like 4 albums or something like that, and they're all still in print digitally, but we did good. I mean, I was in the House of Blues Wrestling Hour. I was on the House of Blues Radio Hour with Dan Aykroyd. I played the Chicago Blues Festival twice, and played the Chicago the Chicago scene quite a bit. So I did it for real. I wasn't making demos. I was a real musician hanging out with real good players. Duke Roblar produced one of my albums. I mean, not many people know blues, but he's a giant factor in the blues world. I did good. It was a lot of fun. It just around 2009, I decided to kind of curtail it because of, I was looking, you go on the road with a bunch of guys, you end up paying a lot of expenses. It's expensive to do. Blues is funny in that you'll play an amphitheater one night and you'll play a club with 15 people the next night. It's funky, it's just,
right.
It's just the way it is. So I looked at my dossier and I said, I think I'll take a little break. I just never went back. I haven't picked up a microphone since 2009, but no, we did good. We made 4 albums and had a blast, and got to play with people like B.B. King, and oh man, I've been on the same stage with like John Mayer, and just on and on the list goes. We did real good.
Man,
we did real good.
That's super cool, man. Like, not a lot of people get a chance to do and pursue one of the loves in their life, like, being involved in the professional wrestling business, but then getting a chance to do two of those things and getting to be involved in blues music and do it at a high level like that. It's really cool, man. So
Yeah, it
that's
was great.
awesome.
And I'll let people know here, my stage name was Robert Charles. Charles was my dad's first name, so I used that as an honorarium to him, you know. My dad had
Right.
passed away when I started all this stuff. And, it's the stuff is still available for free. Just say, "Hey, Alexa, play." It's on Amazon and Spotify. It's the first 2 places, and it's all free. So if anybody wants to hear it, just ask for Robert Charles. It's Charles as opposed to the traditional spelling. And, that's where it's at. I mean, this stuff can still be heard, and every couple of years, I get a royalty check, which is kinda cool. So it's not bad. You know, it still pays for itself after all these years, so it's not awful. It's not much
Check in.
either. It's mainly for
Well,
internet plays. You know, if somebody plays your song, Gene, if you make a record and they
mhm.
play it on the internet a million times, you know, you make about $4,000.
Wow.
It's never been this bad for musicians. It's horrible, you know.
I
And
don't know
blues
I don't know
people,
how they make it anymore.
and I'm not putting anybody down, but like I was a blues guy. There is no man in the street recognition for blues musicians unless you're BB
Yeah.
King or Robert Cray or somebody like that, or the Fabulous Thunderbirds or somebody, you know, Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Right.
So, you know, you could go playing in front of 5,000 people at a blues festival, and the next day you're just walking down the street, nobody knows who you are. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you play the
Yeah.
blues, you're pretty much unknown. Like you're like a polka player. So
You
it's like it's
you
it's a
could leave
funny
the
thing.
stage and walk through the crowd almost and be
Yeah, nobody's
anonymous, which
yeah,
is wild.
yeah, yeah. It's really a strange thing. But you know what? I got to jam with a lot of great people. People I had no business being on stage with, man. It was like, oh god, BB invited me to a jam in Nashville. They opened a BB King Blues Club in Nashville, and on that
Mhm.
stage was BB King, of course, his entire band, Gary Talent from the Bruce Springsteen band, his bass player, and
Yeah.
Coco Montoya, and a lot of just giants of the blues all lined up on stage. And I'm sitting there right next to BB King. I'm like, how did I do this? You know, it was like it was fun. I played with him like 10 times.
Oh, wow, that's awesome, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
y'all
was
go check
something else.
out Robert Charles. I've checked out some of his music. I intend on checking out some more, but,
You
yeah,
have?
Bob's a
Well,
multi-talented, gentleman, yes.
well, thank you. You know, I give all my musicians I work with all the credit because I work with some. You know, it's funny. Guys I work with went on to work with bands like Savoy Brown and Duke Robillard, like I mentioned before. The guys that I work with all went on. They were such great players. They all went on to have long careers with other people. So I'm proud of that too. You know, it proved there was the quality was there. You know, I
Absolutely.
hope
Well, you
anyway.
should be
Yeah.
proud of that. I'm not like I say, that's something not a lot of people have gotten to do. So now there's a specific reason that we were reviewing the July 13th, 1991 episode of USWA tonight, Bob. Would you care to tell the audience why that is?
I guess I was on that show.
That would be it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how that worked out too. I was burnout. I remember just being burnout. I mean, at the Peterborough magazines, we worked on like 7 or 8 different titles all the time. I was
Yeah.
tired, but I had vacation time coming, and a lot of it. So I said, let me go do something different. You know, let's do something different. So I'd gotten to know Jerry Lawler from. He was working a lot of East Coast indies, and I'd bump into him all the time, and we got to know each other that way, and had developed a friendship. So I had his phone number. So I call him and I go, Jerry, I know you guys are working the Pitkin building at that point, not the Mid South
Right.
Coliseum. They were you for I guess they had a rent snafu or something. And I said, I'd love to come to Memphis, like to fly in. Can I get a press pass for your shows? You know, maybe a couple of them. He goes, no, we can do better than that. He says, come on the show. I said, what? He said, yeah, yeah, we'll work out an angle. We'll work something for you to do. I'll call you in a couple of days, and we'll work out something for you to get involved with. I said, all right, sure. So he calls me back and says, "Look, we got this Leatherface character here. You know, this guy looks like Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Lawler loved to come up with these monster
Oh yeah.
characters, you know." And at that point, he had quite a few of them throughout. You know, remember that was the period where he had Tagar and all that other stuff. The guy
Oh
with the
yeah.
a flaming garbage can lid or whatever the heck it was, right?
Lord of the
So
volcano.
Right, right. So I go, okay. So we've got this guy Leatherface, he says, and how can I tie you into Leatherface? I said, I got an idea. There's an old picture in our photo archives at PWI of you with Sam Bass and Jim White. Your old manager and your old first tag team championship partner around these parts. He goes, that's great. He said, it's perfect. Bring that photo with you. I go, okay, good. We'll work something around that. So I get there, and Channel 5, man. Channel 5. First thing I do is I'm in the locker room talking to all the guys. My jaw is open because I at Peterborough was the Memphis guy. We used to trade the tapes back and forth, and
Right.
I watched it every week from 1991 to the time I left the magazines. Excuse me, 1988 until the time I left the mag. I just devoured Memphis. I loved the show. I loved the studio. I loved Dave Brown and Lance Russell and Eddie Marley, just name it. It was just my favorite thing about wrestling at that point because wrestling sucked at that point, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Until the Bulldog, and it was getting real child. We talked about that before we hit record. It was just
Yeah.
it was just weird. But Memphis still had that hard hitting Southern style that I really love. So I'm there, and I'm with Lawler. We're talking about it. He says, "You got that photo?" I said, "Yeah." Here's what we're gonna do. We got a frame for it. It's an 8.5 by 11 promo photo.
Mm.
He says Leatherface is gonna come out. He's gonna run everybody off with his chainsaw, and he's gonna break the frame with his chainsaw and ruin the picture. And he goes, "Can I have the picture?" I said, "Well, what's he gonna go through?" No, no, we'll just run it off on the copier, he says, and then we'll just put the copy in the frame. And
Yeah.
so I'm doing a little interview with Dave Brown, and first of all, to meet those guys, Dave Brown and Eddie Marlin and Mr. Coffee backstage. I mean, the whole 9
Yeah.
yards. I mean, it was like to me, it was like I was a kid in a candy store. The most fun I ever had in wrestling was one week with Jerry Lawler showing me around town and inviting me to his home and being so gracious about me coming down to check things out. And Robert Fuller and Bill Dundee and Dirty White Boy and the Dirty White Girl, and go down the list of the stars they had. My old friend Chris Candido was working there at that point, to start
Yeah.
now. Sabu was there in town at that point. Rob Van Dam was in town at that point. Got to know them through that. So it was like just great. I mean, and so Leatherface runs out, and I give the photo to Lawler, and he goes, "Thank you very much." And then all of a sudden, you hear a chainsaw in the background. Out runs Leatherface, and he first thing he does is he saws a hole in the desk, really loud.
Right.
The chainsaws are loud. It was actually too loud. I saw, the speakers were peaking in the studio. It was really loud, and the fans were screaming.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, he sees the thing, and he just jabs it and breaks it. He breaks it, and Dave Brown picks it because he put a hole right through this classic photo of, it was,
Yeah.
trying to get pathos for Jerry Lawler, I guess, in that regard.
Yeah.
And that was my whole shtick. But that wasn't the cool part. The cool part was it was great to be on the show, but it was great to talk to all these people. I got to go to, I think, West Memphis, Arkansas for one of their other shows. I saw 3
Mhm.
shows while I was there. And finally at the Pitkin building, the Monday night, usual deal.
Right.
I mean, Tom Pritchard and, Rob Van Dam versus Danny Davis, the best opening match I've ever seen to this day. Can you imagine how good that was?
Oh yeah. I mean, all those guys.
Um, Dirty White Girl, just the whole Memphis crew. Eric Embry had the book at that point, and he had a hair versus hair match against Eddie Marlin and ended up shaving his head in the ring. You know, just
Yeah, I was looking forward to asking you that because, so for the listeners, we're not going to dig as deep into the review aspect of this episode as we normally do because I'm more interested in Bob's experience there. Um, but backing up a little bit, I mean, I know you were a big fan of Memphis, but I know it's often said that like fans from New York and wrestlers and I'm curious about like the other magazine guys. Like, what were people's perception of Memphis wrestling overall? Not necessarily yours, but everyone else's of Southern wrestling compared to what they saw up north.
I never met anybody who had any exposure to it. Didn't think it was great, honestly. Memphis was still doing what Memphis did in that Memphis style at that point where everybody else was changing. Memphis was still Memphis. The only thing that really changes is when Lance Russell took the job with the NWA. That
Right.
kind of changed the flavor a little because it had to. He was irreplaceable. Even Dave Brown would admit that.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
but I just think that no, everybody that I knew didn't look at it as a minor league at all. I mean, with the history of the Mid South Coliseum and the people who passed through there, like Randy Savage and the Rock Roll Express, and Tommy Rich and Eddie Gilbert, and you just go down the list. Superstar Dundee, all of them. No, nobody looked at it as a minor league. Nobody looked at it as podunk Memphis or anything like that. They looked at it as a legitimate territory. I don't know what else to say because it was still, I guess, the back end of the territory time right then when I was there. So
Yeah.
nobody looked at it as anything other than a viable wrestling organization. I'm not trying to soft sell you, but I didn't know. I didn't mean anybody said, "Oh, it's just Memphis," or "Oh, it's so small." And when I
Yeah.
was there, I went to a card at Madison Square Garden that drew 8,000. Right? Memphis was running every week, and if you combined the 4 shows, they would outdraw Madison Square Garden. If they ran every week.
Yeah.
So don't tell me there was anything minor league about Memphis wrestling because it wasn't. There really wasn't. They just continued to present it in an old-fashioned style that the fans were used to from years of watching that program. How can you say something is not major league when at one point it has some you can clarify this. I'm sure you know a lot about it. Their TV ratings were ridiculous at their height.
Oh yeah.
Like 80% of the people in the region were watching Saturday morning wrestling, right?
80% of the people who had a television, it was on wrestling. And you're talking about, at some points like 2 million people, in current times for people to kind of give that some context, you have AEW as a nationwide company struggling to draw 500,000 viewers for some of their, Friday and Saturday
Mhm.
night shows. And here you had a Saturday morning local television show in
Yeah,
one market, and TV, I understand that's not that's not apples to apples because TV then and now is different, but still,
right.
it's amazing to think the way a lot of people viewed wrestling in that time period. To think that that many households was tuned into wrestling and the kind of star that Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee and Lance Russell and Dave Brown. I mean, my gosh, I know. Like for me personally, I started watching Memphis wrestling in the early '80s, and Lance Russell felt like my grandpa. He felt like family. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you felt like you knew him, like you trusted him. If Lance Russell told you something, man, that was the gospel. That was the way it was.
I've said this a million times on my own podcast and other people's podcasts. Uh, I use the analogy that Lance Russell was the Vin Scully of wrestling.
Absolutely.
That personal relationship, talking directly to the fan like nobody else could, directly to you, as opposed to selling you an ice cream bar or something like that, or hyping something. Lance was just Lance, and it was almost a personal type of delivery he had, looking into the camera and speaking to the other wrestlers. Oh, come on now! He would get outraged at the. He was the
Yeah.
last announcer to get outraged over bad guys. It all became homogenized after a while. But
He was
villainy to him was
experiencing it with you. You
yes,
know,
exactly, exactly, and you believed every word he said. So no, he was a remarkable talent behind the scenes force, everything else. People are telling me he used to actually sell TV time and everything else and getting the show on in other markets. So he was just, and from what I understand, and the times I met him, a really cool guy. I mean, I got to meet him twice, and I think he was and I didn't meet him in Memphis. I met him through the NWA because we were,
oh yeah.
covering the NWA. Yeah. So, no, nobody liked Lance. Unreplaceable. I
Well,
don't look at
that's how he
anybody's.
ended up
I don't
in
look.
there.
I
He
don't.
was a station manager, so he was a
Right.
TV guy. So,
Hmm.
that wasn't by accident. It was by design. He knew what he was doing. And, he was a major get for Jerry Jarrett and Lawler and, a major cog in that wheel to make it the success that it was.
Yep. I mean, when you think the Channel 5 show, you think his voice. You just hear it. Dave Brown too, to be honest with you. Excuse me. Dave also was a tremendous talent, and he was the area weatherman, and you trusted what he had to say, so the fans believed what he was saying. And what I liked about both of them, they didn't overreact to anything, and they wouldn't. Sure, they they were hyping the Monday night shows at the arena and all that stuff, but they didn't do it in such a way that they felt they were selling you something. They weren't. They were just telling
No.
you what was going on. It was a whole different vibe back then.
Their reaction typically mirrored the reaction of the fan watching at home or in the studio. You know what I mean? Like if y'all were all
Yeah.
sitting there watching it together, they're having the same reaction to what those heels are doing as you're having, and that's what made it relatable. And I think Dave's really underrated because Lance was so good and so beloved. I don't think he really gets the credit that he deserves always, but in this period, like this show that we're talking about here, at this point, it's Dave Brown and Michael St. John, who was a radio guy who still, as I sit here in Gadsden, Alabama, right up the road from me, Michael St. John runs a radio station in Arab, Alabama, about an hour from me.
Is that right?
He sure does, and he's a great guy, and I always thought he did a good job. But obviously, anybody's going to pale in comparison. When you lose Lance, that was going to be tough. But I thought he was a good person to fill that spot, and I thought that Dave really stepped up as the main host and did a good job here. And eventually, him and Corey Macklin in the later days of the USWA were pretty decent pairing. So obviously, Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler had a good relationship with you guys and cooperated with PWI, and you gave them great coverage because there was a time period where our local cable stopped carrying TV5, and it did not go over well with anybody in our community, and it got resolved within about a year. So at that point, my only way of tracking what was happening in Memphis was through the magazines, and so there was always really great coverage across the quote unquote after mags, if you will.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here, curator of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, inviting you guys to listen to many of the programs here as part of the WrestleCopia brand, including, but not limited to, the Wrestling Memory Grenade, currently covering the 1988 and the WWF project. You can also listen to the Regional Wrestling Podcast, where we talk the territories, whether it's Jamie Ward with Georgia 81, Roman Gomez with the UWF in 1986, or Gene Jackson covering Memphis in 85. 3 projects going on right now over there at Regional Wrestling. You can also listen to the Wrestling Stoop with the legend himself, Bob Roop. Bob goes back in time each and every week, covering not just his career, but countless stories and interactions with hundreds of wrestling names spanning his 2 decades in the business. But that's not all. You can also check out the Puro Wrestling Academy with the professor of Puro Resu, Mr. Dan Ginnity. Dan and I go back in time and cover the history of Japanese professional wrestling in the English language. And you can listen to all of those shows and more, all part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network, located over at WrestleCopia.com. That's WrestleCopia.com, and anywhere your podcast streaming needs are met, from Apple to Spotify, Pocket Cast, and beyond. And while you're at it, why not subscribe to our social media guys for all the latest goings on here at the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Plus, I'm constantly adding old school video clips and pictures from throughout wrestling history. You can follow us over on X, formerly Twitter, at Wrestling Grenade. That's at RASSLIN Grenade. Also, follow and like me, Facebook.com/Wrestling Grenade. And why not subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. So if you're looking to support that next up and coming podcast brand, please consider making it WrestleCopia.
And I'm also glad to hear that, this narrative of people looking down on Memphis isn't necessarily true. So.
Not in New York. No way. We were like, man, why can't the rest? I'm telling you, my office was like, why can't we have this here? And the greatest subtle compliment to Memphis ever was Todd Gordon in early ECW. He told me, I want to have Memphis style wrestling on the East Coast. That was his whole idea. Wild, more brawling stuff, more loose rules and stuff like that, more rivalries, more, feuds. He really patterned his early ECW off Memphis. And, Eddie Gilbert even came and had the book for a while. So it's like, that's a compliment to me. And I think Joe Goodhart looked at it that way too. They wanted, the East Coast fans were getting sick and tired of the homogenized WWF stuff. And Tri-State in the Philadelphia area, those shows were wild. They
Oh
had
yeah,
Last Blood Battle Royals and some wild matches with Cactus Jack versus Eddie Gilbert again. So
yeah.
it was more Memphis style than anything else that was going on in the country. Of course, they took
Ab-
the Memphis style and ratcheted it up a notch with a lot of the violence they had. But
Yeah,
because I think what Tri-State, it was a lot more violent than Memphis. Every wrestling has its share of violence, but I think Tri-State was way more violent than Memphis. But I
yeah.
think they were making a point. They were feeding their fans what they were hungry to see, and that's the biggest compliment. When other promotions are copying Memphis, I rest my case.
Yeah, a couple of younger friends of mine, like I'm 47, so I've got some of my friends that are like substantially younger than me, that the Memphis territory is before their time. They're kind of following along with the podcast and watching. They're kind of asking me, what you got coming up? I want to watch the episodes and then watch the podcast. And I sent them this episode. And it's funny you say that, because he goes, oh wow, that show is like an episode of ECW, because number one, this opening segment of this show, we go right to the barroom brawlers attacking Jeff Jarrett and Robert Fuller, and there's just
Mhm.
chairs swinging everywhere. And then, it breaks into this big, Lawler's involved and Eric Embry and all these guys get involved. And it's just chair shots and, people are hurling, tables and different things. And he's like, wow, I didn't know that ECW was influenced that heavily by Memphis, because this is, what'd you say, 91? I said, yeah. He said, so that was way before ECW, right? I said, absolutely it was. And I said,
Mhm.
plus, if you watch the whole show, you'll see Rob Van Dam's on the show, Sabu's on the show. Eventually, the Sandman would pass through Memphis before, you knew who he was, when he was still in his surfer outfit, carrying a surfboard to the ring and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So you're
Yeah,
absolutely
you're absolutely
right.
right. Yeah, you're right too, because it's like imitation's the sincerest form of flattery, as they say, and there's no way that the East Coast federations, the smaller indies, were looking to Memphis for cues. And let's face it, they booked Jerry Lawler up here as often as they could. He was in
Yeah.
Philly a lot. He was in Maryland, Philly. He would come up on weekends and stuff, and he would be here a lot more often than people thought. So it's like, no, Memphis took a backseat to nobody. I can't think of anybody who wouldn't want to go to the Mid South Coliseum to see wrestling from here. From my wrestling fan friends and professionals in the business, I think they thought Memphis was A1. I'm not blowing smoke at you. I just mean it. It's true.
Well, and there were people organizing like bus trips and things down from like Philly and different places to Memphis, if I'm not mistaken, uh, from the 80s on into the 90s, when big cards were coming up. I know a lot of people came down. I was told recently, for when Lawler won the title from Kurt Hennig. It was
Mhm.
pretty well known. It was time. So a lot of people traveled from, states away and from up north to see that. So um,
That was a big deal when I was with the magazines. There was something called the Magic Bus back then. It was a company called the Magic Bus, and it had TVs on it and all this other stuff. And wrestling fans would fill these buses and go to all these different cards around the East Coast. And it was a big
yeah.
deal. You nailed it perfectly, because they would go anywhere. I had no idea they were going to Memphis, but it just shows you how people wanted hard hitting wrestling action instead of Repo Man. What can I tell you? I don't know what to say. Yeah, I don't know what to say. It was like people remember the wrestling they grew up with, and even the teenagers and college age kids would look at WWF. I hate to say this and go, ugh, this isn't what I want out of my wrestling. I want some action. And I think they went to where the action was.
And a lot of people don't understand this piece of the puzzle, and you alluded to it earlier. In Memphis, you had to do something on that TV every Saturday morning to pack that, Coliseum, or at this time the Pitkin building, wherever they were running, but for years the
Mhm.
Mid South Coliseum. And
Right.
people will talk about how big a draw Hulk Hogan was. And then me and Wolfie D were talking recently when he was on the show about, when people talk about what a bigger draw Flair was. And it's like, well, yeah, he's traveling around. He's having to draw crowds in these towns once a month at best, sometimes once every 2 or 3 months. Lawler, was having to put butts in the seats every Monday night, every Saturday. They had to find something interesting to compel people because, a lot of times people are like, well, something big happened last Monday. Yeah, we can probably skip the next couple of weeks. Nothing too crazy is going to happen. And then you'd watch that TV on Saturday morning and they would pull, they'd pull something out of their back with Leatherface is out there with a chainsaw cutting the desk in half. And we're like, oh man, we got to see how Lawler's going to get out of this one, And that takes talent. Like Jerry Lawler to me is one of the most underrated workers in the world because he doesn't get enough credit. I mean, so many people just know him as the puppies guy and the commentator and all that, but for as many years as he spent on top in Memphis and continued to draw crowds, I don't know many other people that could have done it.
No, what he did was impossible. What he did is impossible for the amount of time that he did it, especially. It wasn't like a year or two. It was a decade or two. It was like, and here's the thing. Not only was he had a creative mind, I think he booked most of his own stuff, but he's an underrated athlete. I mean, I don't know if he boxed when he was a kid or something, but nobody threw a faster fist than he did in his youth. And the flying fist from the middle rope and all that stuff. I mean, he really was athletic. People never gave him credit for that. I mean, and he wasn't a muscle guy. He wasn't a big bulging muscle guy, but he looked right. He looked like a wrestler. He had just the right physique to be a professional wrestler. Not too big, not too small, not too slow, not too fast. He was just perfect. And he had a unique style, and he knew how to brawl. And I think that's the influence of the people that came before him in Memphis. And I mean, I know he looked up to why is his name escaping me? He's the most famous wrestler of all time from Memphis. Shoot,
Jackie Fargo.
Jackie Fargo, excuse me. I couldn't think of it immediately, but I know he idolized Jackie Fargo and learned so much from him. And he kind of picked up that ball and kept it going. See, there's the thing. Wrestling for 50 years in the United States was a big attraction regionally. I mean, it was huge and in so many different areas. Memphis was probably the last area where it stayed that way into the 90s, into the early 2000s, I would say. They were the last to go. And when Memphis decided, that was it, everything changed, it's too bad because, alternatives are always good. I mean, here we have two national organizations, and I'm not particularly enamored with either one of them right now. So I don't know what to say, and that's why we have the beauty of YouTube and we have the beauty of the old tapes. And, we can look back in podcasts like yours. We can look back at the stuff we enjoyed when, we were a little bit younger. So that's invaluable. And, it's a good teaching tool, too. And I'm hoping that younger wrestlers and bookers look to old USWA to figure out how it's done, how it's done right, how to draw people week after week. These larger organizations have trouble drawing and stuff. Go back, look into history a little bit. I think it would do them a world of good instead of amplifying, horror movies and like they're doing in wrestling now, horror movies and shooting flamethrowers at each other. Try to go back and find out what the personality conflicts were. I think that's a better draw all the time.
There's so much there that they could, rehash and redo and rework. You don't have to do it exactly the same way. But the thing that always stood about me about Lawler, like Hulk Hogan was this larger than life superhero. And you're Andre the Giant's and one man gangs and everybody could put him in some kind of peril. But in the end, you're like, he's Hulk Hogan. He's going to be fine. But Jerry Lawler, he was small enough. He didn't look like a little kid. He didn't look like Marco Stunt or, the guys of today, but he looked like a man. He looked like a grown man, but he looked enough like the people in the audience where they could relate to him. But he was the hometown team. He was the home team, just like the hometown ball team or whatever. But you could believe he was in peril against most anybody he was in there with. And then you could get behind him and you could pull for him and then he would pull it out. But there wasn't like these mismatches. I mean, there was times where like Hogan's in there with Piper, and I loved Piper, but you're like, what was Piper really going to do to put Hogan in real peril in your mind? You're like, Hogan's a monster. Piper's not going to be able to hurt him. But with Lawler, against Eddie Gilbert, you think, well, Eddie Gilbert's got him right now. But then you put him in there with like Leatherface, like we're talking about this week, and it's like, all right, well, Lawler's going to die this week. This may be the week it happens. This guy's got a freaking chainsaw. We got to see how this plays out, Now, Something about one thing about Memphis, and we've been talking about this a lot in the 93 episodes we've been covering, but there's a good opportunity for it here because you alluded to it earlier. And this is a Memphis specific thing. I don't know if you can name another territory where Eric Embry can walk out. He's a wrestler. He's the booker, unbeknownst to fans, but he's a wrestler. And he calls out a referee, and he's getting on the referee about some questionable calls in his mind. And then eventually the aging matchmaker, Eddie Marlin, comes out. And in what felt like a pretty long segment, by the end of the segment, you've got us roped in to wanting to go see Eric Embry wrestle a referee and an over-the-hill matchmaker in a 2-on-1 hair versus hair match. And somehow it's plausible, and somehow I want to go see it. But if I try to tell my friend, like, yeah, man, you need to watch, I'm going to send you this episode. You need to watch it. There's this really cool angle where Eric Embry is going to end up wrestling the referee and the matchmaker who's like, in his 60s. They're like, what the, why would I watch that? That sucks. But they make it work. And Eric Embry was perfect for Memphis. He was great in Texas, but this guy was made for Memphis. What did you think of Eric here in Memphis, and what did you think of his booking?
Eric Embry is one of my most admired people in wrestling ever. And I was lucky enough while I was in Memphis to sit down with him and talk a little wrestling psychology and what they were doing and, all that other stuff. I spent about 45 minutes talking to just the two of us. If you remember that episode that you're talking about, which is the one I was on, he comes out. First of all, he always looked like an unmade bed. His hair was all messed up, right? And he was a little bit overweight. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't big. He wasn't a huge guy. He used to be a light heavyweight guy. But here comes this disheveled, big mouth, loudmouth guy, snarky and nasty, and he was so good at that. I mean, in a way, he was like the Southern Lou Albano. He doesn't look like he should be doing what he's doing, but there he is. And you put him in the ring, and he would win 75% of the time, because he had that much skill. Now, he had the psychology going on. He knew what it is to make himself a heel. And everybody couldn't stand him at that point. He was the number one heel for probably about a year there, I would say, in addition to doing the book at the same time. So, yeah, I was a big Eric Embry fan. I thought he was vastly underrated. I mean, he helped draw a few people in Texas too during the last vestiges of the sportatorium and stuff like that. So he's to me he was a big influence. And shoot, gosh, he made Phil Hickerson PY Chew High and got him over. How the heck did you do that? Right? Right?
Exactly.
I mean, everybody knew it was Phil Hickerson, but there he was with Tojo Yamamoto, and it worked like gangbusters. He just had the touch. He had the touch for Memphis. I think that was the main thing too. He understood the psychology that the fans grew up watching there and just followed right along. And of course, he was in cahoots with Jerry Jarrett, who was a genius to begin with. Let's not forget Jerry too.
If you had only saw like 91, 92 Eric Embry in Memphis, you'd have a hard time convincing somebody like, oh, he was a babyface in Texas. Like he was at one time, he was a huge babyface, and he even had a little bit of time as a babyface in Memphis. But yeah, if there was ever a guy who was tailor-made for Memphis, I thought Eric Embry was it. And, it was Jarrett and Lawler had swapped the booking back and forth for so long. I think it was time to get, somebody else in there with some different ideas and kind of switch things up a bit. So, and this episode is interesting because like here you got Embry on here. Me being a guy that grew up watching a lot of Continental and then watching like the 88 stud stable, the controversial angle with Brickhouse Brown being booted from the stud stable, seeing Fuller in this era as the babyface tag team partner of Jeff Jarrett was fun because when I read about it in the magazines, because like I say, originally this was that time period where I couldn't see it. And I'm like, Robert Fuller is a babyface with Jeff Jarrett? Like, I don't know about that, but man, you watch these promos on this show and man, he's got a fiery promo. Like that one promo, he's enraged because they had this weird rule in USWA at the time where titles could change on a DQ, or at least they'd pull it out when they needed to. They didn't use it all the time, but every so often they would pull it out. And him and Jarrett had lost the tag titles to the Barroom Brawlers, who was Doug Vines and Sword. Blanking on his first name, but they had been the Devil's Duo. They were like veterans, had been around quite a long time. And Robert cuts just a great heated promo.
He was what a talent. First of all, he was an imposing big drink of water. He was legit, 6'6", 6'7"? My God. And I'll tell you what, he could get over as a face as well as he could as a heel. And he was a great heel. You know, they had that Memphis Mafia thing going for the longest time, and he was in Continental for the longest time, and he was in the NAWA about a year before that for about a year. That failed Ricky Steamboat promotion. But wherever he went, pushed. You know, small, and then he ended up in WCW later on as Colonel Robert Parker, and he got a good push there. So he did really good for himself in a long career. Both Ron and Robert were around forever, since at least late 60s. Are we talking early 70s? You know, they were around forever. So now, Hall of Famer Robert Fuller's a Hall of Famer in my eyes.
Oh, for sure.
I don't care where he worked. He was a top draw wherever he worked, and could work a good match too. And he knew how to build drama. Robert knew how to build drama. He was really good at that.
And as silly as the Colonel Parker character sounds on paper, it was perfect for him. He made it work. He played it so well. I loved like the stuff with him and Sherry on down the line, and the stuff with him. He's just a super entertaining guy. Like he could be on TV in an entertaining role now, as far as I'm concerned.
I forget. I was with WCW magazine too, two different versions of it, and I had to call Robert Fuller, and I'm asking him a question, and he's answering the questions on the phone in character, so beautiful in character. We're going to make a lot of money with this man, Vader, and you know what? I'm sitting in my mansion and I'm drinking a mint julep, and I know what I'm talking about. And he had that southern drawl, and he was staying in character, and I actually appreciated it because he was so old school, getting the Colonel Parker character over, sitting on his plantation or whatever. Too much, man. He was great. He was great. Just wow. It's funny when you do phone interviews. Some of the guys would stay in character, and some guys would just say anything. It depended on the wrestler, I guess. When I was interviewing them, I interviewed so many guys, and a lot of Memphis guys too. It depended on what their mood was at that time, I guess, because I never told them to stay in and out of character. They would just talk the way they talked, and I would just go with it, Because you know what, all the magazines were all kayfabe in those days anyway. So no matter what they said, I'm not going to let them say, secretive behind the scenes stuff. We wouldn't have been allowed to publish it anyway. But now when he stayed in character as Colonel Parker, I was having a blast with it. I was literally laughing out loud at him because he was so good at it.
Yeah, I could do a whole hour interview with you just asking you about how the magazines worked and the kayfabe of it all. We'll save that for another time because I'm fascinated with that.
It's a funny thing too, because I had access to so many locker rooms and I wouldn't go in because of Memphis. I'll tell you a little story about my travels there. So I'm going to go. It was either on already or I'm going on soon, but I had to hit the men's room, right? So I asked one of the attendants, "Can you tell me where the men's room was?" He said, "There's one in that big office right there. Why don't you use the one in there?" I said, "Fine, thank you very much." So I'm going into this room, and I'm in the men's room, which was part of it was a darkened area with a desk. And when I come out, there's Eric Embry and Eddie Marlin and Jerry Jarrett. And they were going over it. Now they knew who I was and why I was there. I'd spoken to them all. But when I came out of that men's room, they looked like they saw a deer charging for them on the highway.
Right.
They didn't want me to hear anything they were saying because they were still strict kayfabe. It didn't matter that I knew everything.
Yeah.
They don't want those secrets out. Even, they knew they could trust me. They knew who I was. But when they were talking over like angles and stuff, they were it was still a secret society in Memphis as late as 91. That same time that I was there, same day I was there. So at that point, I had access to WCW and other organizations, but I never went and I actually worked for early ECW, and it was like I never went in the locker rooms. And now the guys, all these years later, go, "Why didn't you come in the locker room and say hi? People thought you had an attitude." I said, "I didn't have an attitude. I thought that everybody was kayfabe." And they're like, "No, no, you could have come in and say hi. You knew us in there." So it was a funny thing that they were still. I'm telling you, the look on their face, all three of their faces when I walked out, they were like, "You shouldn't be in here. You shouldn't be here." I was like, "Holy shit!" you know, I didn't mean anything by it. Somebody told me to use the restroom over here.
There's some of those older guys to this day are still not comfortable with doing these shoot interviews and openly talking about. I mean, it's so far out of the bag now, but even now, some of those guys still aren't comfortable talking about it, and they still feel like it's not right because it was just so ingrained in them
Yeah.
because it's how they made their living, and they were all afraid that, oh man, if this ever gets out, then it's kind of out there, but if we ever acknowledge it, it's all over with. So, yeah, I can see that still being a thing in
Oh, it
91
really was
for
there.
sure.
And so I used that as I made my travels. It's like, well, even if they let you in, don't stay long. And that was
Yeah,
the wrong. Now, a guy like Brian Solomon, who wrote the Sheik book, he said that's the wrong thing to do. They want to talk. They want publicity.
yeah.
And
And I'm
because
sure you felt like
I
you were
had a
just
guy.
being respectful.
I was following what the rules were.
Yeah,
I believed in kayfabe because it was still the tail end of that in the early '90s, if you can believe it. I mean, serious kayfabe. Don't be seen with your opponent, that type of thing.
yeah.
I mean, look at what happened right around that period when they caught what was it, the Iron Sheik and Hacksaw Duggan in a car together. Remember that?
Right
Remember
in the
that
middle
made
of their angle.
headlines,
Oh
and it
yeah.
didn't even make headlines for why they got pulled over. It made headlines because they were together. So
Right.
I rest my case.
My mom, who was never a fan of me being a wrestling fan, couldn't wait to tell me that when I got home from school that day. Well, your little wrestler buddies are out riding together that you were watching on TV the other night. I'm like, it is what it is, I guess. But
It is what it is.
um,
Listen, we all went to the matches as kids, suspending our disbelief, wide-eyed, looking at those shiny boots and bright lights and crazy costumes. And when the bell rang, we were in our own little sport. It was our own little thing. If you grew up like I did, Gene, I remember my friends and I had a lot of friends who were into wrestling, and we would all go together. But when we went back to school, we'd never talk about it because it wasn't
yeah,
cool.
yeah,
In that period, I graduated high school in '76. It wasn't cool back then. It was
no.
popular, but nobody talked about it. Almost like you were sneaking Playboys into school or something like that. It was right. It was
There'd be a
like
little
it
circle
wasn't
of you over
something.
there, and you're like,
Yeah,
nobody
it would be.
around.
Hey,
Hey, did you
did you
watch it
see?
last night?
Did you see Chief Jay Strongbow yesterday? Exactly right. I mean, it was our thing. It was our own little secret society. Boys, wrestling changed in that regard. Now it's so mainstream, it's not even funny. You
It
know.
is, and their goal back to the Russo days was their goal was let's try to drag as many mainstream people in. Let's try to make as many mainstream people like wrestling as we can. Let's do as much non-wrestling related stuff as we can. And to me, that's where things really started going off the rails because you weren't going to get those people, not for any significant amount of time. Yeah, you might get one big rating as they tune in to see whatever celebrity you've got on the show. Mike Tyson's on the night. We'll watch, but you weren't going to keep them, and you just ended up alienating the real fans who supported the business. But what do I know? I mean, I guess in some ways that there were positive effects from mainstream people coming on. Of course, Andy Kaufman is the most famous example from Memphis. But um, I don't know. There's enough podcasts out there debating the Vince Russo and the depth of WCW and all that jazz, so we won't steer off in that direction. But I mean,
Right.
as a kid, like I knew it couldn't be real because I knew if me and my friend went out in the yard and I punched him in the face 10 times, there was going to be bruises. There was going to be, it didn't work that way. But I didn't know how it worked, and I was fine not knowing how. And I really didn't want to know. I mean, yeah, I wanted to know how, but then again, deep down, I really didn't want to know how it all worked. Um, and I still go back and watch it and enjoy it just as much now as I ever did. Now, is it just merely for the nostalgia factor? I don't know. I've gotten to the point. I watched wrestling all my life from when I was probably 4 years old. I'd watch every bit of wrestling I could find. I would buy every wrestling magazine I could get my hands on. I'd rent every wrestling video within 40 miles of me for years and years and years. And I've kept getting more and more disenchanted with current wrestling in the last few years. And I suddenly had this epiphany a few months ago that I keep saying this to my friends, and I know they're sick of hearing it. And this sounds silly. It sounds obvious, but one day I was like, I don't have to watch all this stuff if I'm not enjoying it. And I just stopped watching the current stuff, and I started focusing on, that's when I started doing this podcast, and I started focusing on going back, watching the stuff that I love. And every once in a while, I'll be like, my friend will go, hey, they did a really cool angle with the Bloodline and Paul Heyman the other night. And I'll go seek that out. I'll watch some things like that here and there, but I'm not going to hate watch it every week like so many people do just so I can get on Facebook and go, well, that really sucked. What are they doing? They're killing the business. I'm like, well, they may be killing what you loved about the business, but they're making money.
My God. I keep saying they're going to ruin it. They're going to flush this down the toilet, but they just, for WrestleMania, they draw 150,000 people over 2 nights in Philadelphia. So who am I to say at this point? Yeah. Everything changes. Everything in entertainment changes. But I'm thankful for people like you, and I'll tell you why. Because I feel the exact same way you do. And, there's a bunch of us wrestling people right now who are into Me TV Tunes, which is that new station where they brought back the Bugs Bunnies and the Yogi Bears. And we're all on Facebook chatting about this, like, oh my gosh, they showed Underdog yesterday and all this other stuff.
Right.
Now we have Dave Dynasty and people like you and Chris P. Lettuce and the people on YouTube putting out these, public domain old wrestling shows. I look at them all the time. I look at the old classic stuff on Peacock that's a part of the WWE section, wherever I can get my hands on it. Mario Saboldi's tape. You know why? Because it's what I grew up on. It's what I was fond of, And I'm thankful that people have dug up as much stuff as they have. There's a lot of stuff lost to time. The first federation I ever watched was Peter Martinez's NWF out of Cleveland, which for some reason, when I was in upstate New York, they promoted Albany, which is where I'm from originally. And all those tapes were gone because in that era, as you probably know, they would send the tapes to the TV stations, get them back, and they tape over them and put the next week. So a lot of those federations are gone forever. Nobody could ever think that someday there would be home video tape recorders and DVRs and stuff like that. So, but I'm just thankful that there is such a nostalgia bug going around right now. It's keeping me on the air. I'll tell you that much.
I mean, it kept me from just being like, screw wrestling altogether. I'm just done with it. To where it's like, no, just watch what I enjoy. And people are spoiled. Like, man, I was a big time tape trader. And, a lot of this stuff that, like, Portland and different territories that were a long way from Mississippi and then later Alabama, where I live now. The only way I read about them in the magazines, but the only way I got to actually see them was when I started trading tapes. And, it was a crapshoot. You'd set up a trade with somebody and they say, oh, it's great quality. And then you get it. It's the 10th generation VHS. And it almost looks like that grainy, porn we try to watch as kids on the scrambled satellite channel. And then you'd always get that jerk that's like, I've got it. I've got the last Battle of Atlanta in, perfect video quality. And you're like, I know he doesn't, but I got to find out if he does. And you trade with him and you get burned. You send him 5 tapes and you get it. And it's, something totally different. And it was fun. It was kind of like a game. But now, I mean, you jump on YouTube, Bob, and you can see things that I never dreamed I would get to be able to see. And it's all right there at your fingertips. A sampling of every territory there's ever been, just about. Like listening to your podcast, I've heard you talking and interviewing people about Bruiser Bedlam, and that's just something I had read and heard about. And now I've been going on YouTube and going back and watching that off of your recommendation. And now I've discovered something it's brand new to me because I've never saw it.
I have to ask you, is that little period that I'm so hype about as good as I'm making it out to be when they had Scott Rechsteiner and stuff like that? Because I'm telling you, they went from a mess, and then they gave Dr. Jerry Graham the book, and he brings in Scott Recksteiner, and he had the great Wojo. He helped train a lot of the people that were there, and they started running these really good angles,
Mm-hmm.
and they got real heat. I mean, old school. There's going to be a riot in the arena heat. So I'm watching these tapes. And I'm like, people need to see this. Because I know
Yeah.
nobody's seen it. Nobody's seen this other than Dave Dynasty. God rest his heart. He's a nice guy. He
Oh, yeah.
has the old Humanics. I don't know where he got them. The original broadcast tapes, and he spent his own money to get them digitized and put them out on the internet for free. The guy should be ordained, my friend. He is like a king amongst wrestling collectors. He's one of my heroes because without him, and
Yeah.
movies putting out all the Memphis stuff too. I mean, it's just awesome. It's like if you name it, you can pretty much watch it. Not all of it. I mean,
Not
all
all
of
of
a
it, but
sudden,
way more than you ever could in our lifetimes. That's for
all
sure.
of a sudden, people are discovering George Cannon superstars of wrestling from Canada, which is somehow filtering into the YouTube now. And I'm
Yeah.
like, wow. Because I remember seeing that when I went to college in upstate New York. It was a Canadian station up that I
Mm.
could get. So I'm like, this is like the golden age of wrestling nostalgia right now.
It is. And folks, if you're one of these people that hate watches WWE and AEW every week, and especially if you're guys, in our time frame of like age wise, like go back and check out some of the stuff and watch some stuff that you could possibly enjoy. And if you find something you don't enjoy that, well, like we just said, there's thousands of others. Just keep moving around until you do. But like I think it helps to be of a certain age. Like for me, I watch the Bruiser Bedlam like when you recommended it, and I'm able to look at it with context of what was going on at the time and what it
Mhm.
compares to. If I'm just a guy I've been watching current wrestling, and then you're like, "Hey, check out Bruiser Bedlam," and then I'm gonna go back and watch them. I'm like, well, this old shit, this ain't, man.
Right,
I'm
right,
not gonna
right.
understand the context of it, but knowing uh, the time frame and what wrestling was like then, and having seen back in the tape trading days some of the stuff that came before that, and like you're pointing out how far it had came as far as what they were doing with the angles and the talent of some of the wrestlers they brought in. Oh yeah, it's great stuff that, like you said, I mean, it's 30 something years old, but it's brand new to me, so I'm digging it. I look forward to coming in and checking them out every other day.
Speaking of tape trading, when I started with PWI in '88, I didn't have to trade tapes anymore. They were sending them to our offices. You know how cool that was? Every federation was sending us stuff, and if they weren't, we had a lady in Atlanta sending us Joe Pedicino's 6 to 8 hour wrestling block that
Oh
used to be on
wow.
Saturday nights. Every week, we'd get these things in. I was watching Continental. I was watching Smoky Mountain, watching Memphis, watching, whatever else was on there. I was watching this little federation out of Georgia, watching young Sid Vicious, right?
Yeah.
Young
Yeah.
young Nick Busick, just all these guys, old Joe Deaton, people you wonder where are these guys from? A lot of people started in this tiny itsy bitsy little like young Buff Bagwell before in these little
Yeah.
tiny Georgia federations and stuff like that. And I would go back to Stu Sachs, the publisher, and go, we really ought to do something on this Sid Vicious guy. So I brought him into our conference and popped the tape in. I said, look at this guy. He went, he doesn't do anything. I said, look at him. I was right about him.
I mean, the
I actually
action
gave him
figure
his
come to life,
I actually gave him his there's a few guys back in the day I gave the first publicity to. I'm proud about that because I picked them out of a lineup when nobody was seeing them at that point, and I'm really proud about that. I went to the publishers too and said, "We got to do this." Rob Van Dam was one of them, and it was like, you know what I'm saying? At least it
Yeah.
it kind of justified my existence as a journalist that I could see 10 wrestlers at an indie card and go, "Look at him. There's something about him." And I was right most of the time. So, and I got to hype him because I could write about anybody I wanted to write about. And that was a nice little sense of freedom. It was good.
I remember being excited because I would see those articles where it'd be like introducing Rob
Right.
Zukowski
I
or
wrote those.
Sid
Yeah.
Vicious,
Yeah.
and I would
Mhm.
read those and follow those, and then when they would finally pop up on some sort of television that I could see, whether it was in Memphis or Robbie V shows up W, like, oh shit, I remember seeing that guy in the magazine, and I already felt a connection to him. That's why you were doing a huge service for those guys, because people like me who read the magazines religiously, when they finally popped up in the TV, on our TV or in our local arena, you kind of felt a connection. I'm like, oh, I read about that guy. Oh my God, he's here. And now I have a vested interest in him, where before I'd have been like, who's that guy? Now let's see what he's about. But I'd already read about him. I kind of knew some things about him. I've been following him in the results, the PWI results. I always loved reading those to see who was where and what was going on.
Gosh.
So,
There's another thing I miss, man. I really miss the magazine days, and not because I work for them. I'm talking being a kid and picking up the Ring Wrestling, or Wrestling World, or wrestling anything,
yeah.
And I remember I used to get a 50 cent a week allowance to spend that whole 50 cents for a copy of Wrestling World. I liked it that
Mhm.
much, and we didn't even have any wrestling on TV at that point. It had stopped being on our local TV. I would spend money on wrestling magazines. I loved to read about the people I couldn't see and the wild angles that they would come up with, in other cities. And I miss that feeling of I can't describe it. It's not nostalgia either. It's like learning about the whole wrestling world, even though you couldn't see the whole wrestling world. Now you
Yeah.
just turn on your cable TV and it's all right there in front of you. There's no looking for it. There's no discover. There's no learning curve. I don't know. I just loved those magazine days, and like I said, I give equal props to the other brands of magazines, because it's like, without them, how did I find out about Memphis when I was younger, or Alabama, or Florida,
Yeah.
Championship Wrestling from Florida, or Canada, or anything, Detroit, you name it. So it was all the magazines back then,
Man, I would
and
cut the grass, I would rake the yard, I would do chores to earn money so that on the weekend when we went to the store, I could buy me 2 or 3 wrestling magazines, or I could go
Mhm.
rent the newest wrestling tape at the video store. And I was so excited. And like I said, it's almost too easy these days. Like, people are spoiled. Like, everything's just out. You can Google and find out anything you want to know. You can jump on YouTube, see anything you want to see. And I mean, that's cool. That's great, especially, for us now. But man, that thrill of going, like you say, and seeking it out, and, trying to learn about this stuff and having to kind of work for it. It's time to wrap it up. There's one story I want to share, especially since you mentioned Sid Vicious. Like, one of the things that I think wrestling magazines provided that doesn't get enough recognition. There's one particular article that stands out where years later I went back and thought, man, wrestling magazines really serve this purpose. So in 1990 at Halloween Havoc, when we had the Sting and Sid Vicious championship match, the infamous finish where Sting fights his way back up the aisle, and then suddenly Sting comes hunched over back down the aisle and rolls into the ring, and he goes to slam Sid Vicious, and Sid falls on top, and he wins the championship. And then the cameras poorly captured Sting and Barry Windham in the aisle passing each other, and then Stinger splashes him and wins the champion, or retains the championship. It was very unclear watching the pay-per-view that night what the hell had just happened. Like, what was that?
right.
And it's funny because in shoot interviews in recent years, Sid has claimed he didn't know that was going to be the finish. He thought he was really winning the title, which I find suspect. But I remember, even as a 13-year-old kid in 1990, I was like, now, how did Barry Windham know what Sting was going to be wearing tonight? And how did he know exactly how to paint his face? And man, I don't know, man. That don't exactly sit well. Fast forward like 3 months later, I'm at the mall in Columbus, Mississippi, in Bookland at the time, before it was Books a Million, and I'm looking at, it's either Inside Wrestling or The Wrestler. And on the cover, it said something to the effect of, find out the behind the scenes story of, how the Halloween Havoc hoax was accomplished. Something like, that's not the right word.
Hoax. That's right. I was there at that time, with
And
the company at that
so
point.
I'm
Yeah.
reading this story, and they talk about the fact that since Sting used to be a horseman, the horseman had access to his seamstress, and they paid her off and threatened her to find out what Sting was going to be wearing in Halloween Havoc, and then he was able to find out what his paint. So they provided a backstory to how that was able to all come together. And I thought, man, for a magazine that's not a WCW magazine, they have no real vested interest in tying up all these loose ends and trying
Mhm.
to fill in some huge plot holes, even for a 13-year-old kid. I thought, man, like, I hope these companies appreciated that these magazines are out there taking the time to construct this story and come up with this whole way to make something that was completely illogical somehow makes sense. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool, man. I always
Yeah.
just wanted to point that out. Like, man, that was really something,
That was one of my favorite covers while I was there. That shit-eating grin on Barry Windham's face, right?
Yes.
Just he's looking, he's going, "Look what I did." I thought the angle was brilliant personally. I did. I really liked that one. And Sting comes out with a rope. Remember he had a rope around his,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
he
It'd
just
been tied
busted
up.
out of being tied up. It was kind of clumsily done. You're right. It was very confusing at first, but once you realize what had happened, I said that wasn't bad. I've seen worse than that, and it was novel. And you know what? Wyndham really did look like seeing the hair. It was perfect.
Oh, at watching it live, that's one of the few pay-per-views, like my buddy had a satellite and we got to watch it live. We didn't realize that wasn't Sting
Nobody
until
did. Yeah.
the real Sting's in there with the rope around his arm. We're like, wait a minute, what's going on? And then they show that one little, just a second of them in the aisle passing each other. But it was a cool angle, but it was just poorly executed on WCW's part. And if they would have came on the Saturday night show and told the story that the magazines told to make all that make sense, I think it would have helped. But just the way they presented it, it was, like I said, it was clumsily done, and then it really wasn't explained after the fact. And you're just kind of left with going, I don't know exactly what happened. I sure as hell don't know how it happened, but all right, Sting's still the
One
champ,
thing
so that's cool.
One thing that bothered me, even in those days, to today, especially today, is the lack of continuity in wrestling.
Yes,
I think continuity is vital. Things need to be explained, and you got to figure out how you got from point A to point B. Now they go to point C without having a point A or a point B. It's like that's part of the psychology, the build. What makes it exciting? What makes you want to tune in the next week? You just don't throw things on the screen and say, "Well, this is it." No, you have to have a reason for the 2 people to be at loggerheads with each other, and fighting each other. I think that's another reason I think people need to look back at the angles of the past to learn how to build things a little slower than they do now. There's
yes,
instant feuds. WWE, you'll watch the TV and there's a guy in the ring, and here comes another guy down the aisle with a microphone in his hand going, "I think you stink. I want a match against you." And they yell, "Get a referee." Huh? Was there something scheduled for that program at that time?
yeah,
It's so
yeah,
bogus, this is what bothers me, the lack of common sense, just, logic. It's fun to build a feud like that, with 2 guys insulting each other. That's wrestlers have done that forever, but just to walk out and say, "Get a referee?" What were we gonna watch, a test pattern for an hour and a half? I mean, I don't get it. It makes no sense to
Exactly.
me.
I don't think they understand how insulting it is to fans when you slap them in the face with none of this matters. We don't care if you've been paying attention. We don't care if you've been following this for 3 or 4 weeks because it don't matter. We're just going to go in another direction now. I used to like when it really paid off. I think one of the greatest examples of when they did the Savage and Hogan split in '88, and then they would show the highlight video before WrestleMania 5, and you saw these little subtle things that had stretched back months before. And when you watched them all in a highlight reel back to back to back, you're like, oh, how did I miss that? Oh, this was, as a kid anyway, you're like, wow, this has been building. This is all fits together. But in later years, you would start to follow an angle, and then it's all of a sudden they would just drop it. And then you're just like,
Mhm.
why have I been watching this for 6 weeks and this went nowhere? And I remember even on the little small local indie level that I wrestled on in the late 90s, this guy trained me and I started working his shows. And I started out as a heel and I'd worked like four shows in a row as a heel. And I show up and he's like, you're going to be a babyface tonight. And I'm like, we've been here the last 3 months and I've been a heel. I can't just be a babyface. We got to turn me. Like, nah, it don't matter. I'm like, what? He's like, they don't pay attention. I'm like, yeah, they do, because a few months ago, I was sitting out there in the crowd and you used to do stupid stuff like this. And I'd go, that guy was a good guy last time. Why is he bad this time? And I would go home mad because I feel like I'm wasting my time following this crowd. Like, yeah, it matters. And he's like, it's wrestling. These folks don't pay attention to this stuff. And that just always stuck in my head of like, so is that what these guys think? Is that what they think? We're just simpletons that we're just going to show up and watch whatever you put in front of us. We're just going to watch it. So it don't matter. It's insulting.
I get that vibe. I've always gotten that vibe that some of the promoters think fans are DUMB. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And they treat them like that. And I think it's always been unfair. I think wrestling is like any other thing you watch on television. There's probably college professors that watch it and junk men that do it. You know, it's kids watch it and old people watch it. Treat them with a little respect and they'll keep coming back. You know, you
Yeah.
slap them in the face enough. Well, I know people my age don't look at it anymore. That's for doggone sure. So it's like, you know, I don't want to tell you my age, but there's younger faces on the coins in my pocket. So it's like, I don't know what to say. But there's the thing though. Wrestling fans have been loyal. They put up with bad angles and bad shows and bad decades. Yet there they are. If you look at a crowd on Monday Night Raw, you'll see that in the 8th row or something, there's like a senior citizen couple every time.
Yeah.
Wrestling fans are real loyal and they deserve to be treated a little better than they usually are. That's just my 2 cents.
Amen to that. And I don't think there's a better note that we could end on. Bob, I could sit here and talk all night.
Yeah.
This has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And I hope we get to do it again sometime. But
well, you're coming on my show, so let people know that right now. You're going to be on my show, so we can continue this conversation there.
Outdated Wrestling Hour. So we're going to talk some more wrestling. I'm super excited about being there. I really enjoy Bob's podcast each and every week. So hope you guys have enjoyed this one, and I hope you check us out on the Outdated Wrestling Hour and all of the great Outdated Wrestling episodes that are out there, and check out the Outdated Entertainment Hour too, because that's fun. That's what it's all about. Hey, tell folks how they can find your podcast and look you up if they would like to.
Things have gone so well with this. It's so easy. The best thing I can tell people to do is type in Outdated Wrestling Hour on your browser, and you will see it in every single podcast app that I can think of. Yep. All of them. We're also on YouTube. I've discovered a lot of people like YouTube for podcasting. Personally, I don't think anybody wants to look at this face, so it's just an audio podcast on YouTube and YouTube Music too. But we're everywhere. Everywhere you get podcasts, you can find it. Or go to our website, which is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. Every one of our episodes are there. I'm never going to Patreon you. All of them will be for free as long as I'm doing the show. So you can listen to the first one to the last one. Find me on Facebook if you want. I'm Bob Smith. I'm the only Bob Smith singing with BB King on my page there. You've seen it, Gene, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the best way to get a hold of me. Or you can write to us at outdatedwrestling@gmail. And I always answer back. That's the one thing not every host does. I will answer your letter. If you write to us and have something to say, I will converse with you. Because if you took the time to write to me, I sure as hell I'm going to take the time to say hello back to you. So if you have something to say, and I get these great letters of people saying, "Oh, you got a fact wrong." I love those. I think those are great. No, it wasn't 91; it was 81. You fool! I was like, "Oh, okay, you're right. I said that wrong." And have you gotten those yet? People who love it. Wait a minute, he didn't win the Intercontinental Championship. He won the North American. Those type of things. Yeah, they will find you. They will find you.
I get 2 or 3 a week, and then a couple of those have turned into people that I now use to fact check things ahead of time. I'll watch the episode and I'll go, "Hey, what do you know about this? Is this correct?" And one guy in particular knew several of the wrestlers, and he's got a lot of great information, and now he's become a good resource for me to research things. So, going into it with attitude, just like what you just described, it's not a bad thing necessarily. Yeah, some people are jerks about it. Some people are amateur fact checkers, it seems like, for a hobby, and that's fine, whatever. We've all got this useless wrestling knowledge bouncing around our heads, so you got to use it for something, I guess, if you're not doing a podcast.
How you get Apple reviews for your podcast. Some guy said something that I didn't know when Tito Santana was a champion in some decade or so. I couldn't remember. He goes, "If he doesn't know that, how can I trust anything else he says?" Something like that he wrote. I go, "Dude, just spell my name right. I don't care." I do not keep track of every championship that every wrestler's ever had. I would like to spend time with females and do other things too. Okay, you may know every single belt in succession that every wrestler who's ever lived has. I don't waste my time with that stuff. I'm sorry, I'll look it up.
Years,
I know.
PWI, all these wrestlers you've known, all this wrestling history, and it's all undone because you didn't know a Tito Santana fact. That's hilarious.
Like I have no credibility now because I couldn't remember that Tito Santana was the Intercontinental Champion in '81. I rest my doggone case. You can't please them all.
You can't please.
You can't please them all. There's another great quote. They crucified the Lord, so we're all like, who among us is not going to be wrong once in a while,
Exactly. So, what chance do we have? Well, Bob, man, I've been excited about this ever since we set it up. It lived up to my expectations and then some. What a fun time. Hope we get to do it again, and appreciate you doing it, man.
Gene, I am very flattered that I want people to know Gene looked me up to come on the show. So I am very flattered that you did that. And I'm very appreciative. And we're going to talk again soon. And best is yet to come. And congratulations again on the success. This is a good show, man.
Thank you.
People are finding it. So the proof is in the numbers.
Hey guys, this is Wolfie D from PG-13. Check out my podcast, Live and in Color with Wolfie D, every Monday at noon. We're talking Memphis, we're talking ECW, WCW, WWF, everywhere that I've been. We even have some great guests, some Hall of Famers on the show with us. Every Monday at noon, Live and in Color with Wolfie D.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Give Me Back My Pro Wrestling, the podcast that's based on the old school, but can still help you find the good stuff from today. Jimmy Street and the Plastic Sheik, Jared, are the undisputed tag team champions of the wrestling podcast world. From thought-provoking topics to superstar interviews to action figure expertise. This team does it all, and all they ask is, give me back my pro wrestling! Every other Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
This is Wrestling Nostalgia, the podcast that dives into wrestling history. Hey, wrestling fans, I'm Dave Dynasty, and if you enjoy podcasts that are knowledgeable and history-driven, then Wrestling Nostalgia is for you. With great guests and fun interviews, there are over 200 episodes in our archives. We chat with several first-time guests and often cover topics not discussed on other podcasts. Look up Wrestling Nostalgia on your favorite podcast platform and visit all of our links at linktree/wrestlepod. That is linktr.ee/RASSLEPOD. And remember, wherever you go, whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.
All right, folks, that was a great conversation with Bob Smith, formerly of PWI. And right now, we're going to get back into our normal topic of 1993 USWA. And to do that, we are joined by a very special guest, Dangerous Doug Gilbert. Doug, how you doing, man?
Man, I'm doing good. What's going on, G?
Oh, man, we've just we started in January of 93, and we've worked our way up. We're into March now. And me and Richard and Josh, my co-host, and we've had a variety of guest co-hosts as well. But man, we've really been enjoying this angle with you and your brother Eddie, and got a lot of questions about it. So that's why I'm excited to have you on here. Of course, we're also going to talk here in a little bit about your upcoming podcast of your own coming soon, Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. We're going to get there, but before we get there, let's talk about how I know you guys had feuded in Global with you as the Dark Patriot, but to my knowledge, this was the first time that as Doug Gilbert, you had feuded with your brother. Is that correct?
That is correct. And, man, you talking about rough. My brother was something else. I mean, anybody I think that if you would talk to about getting in the ring with my brother, he was 110% all the time. I mean, Eddie was great. I mean, he was genius. Great worker, and I mean, he'd push anybody. I don't know anybody that wouldn't tell you that. And also, just to start out, that USWA podcast, USWA, I've been all over the world, and I can honestly say, which, I mean, I love Japan and everything, and, I worked a little bit for the WWF, WCW, ECW, and everything, but USWA is my territory. That's what, I mean, as far as my favorite territory, that was it, and that was home. And I mean, myself, my brother, my dad. I mean, it wasn't USWA when it was my dad and my brother started. It was CWA, but I mean, it just progressed into USWA. But man, I'm glad you're doing this podcast, USWA deal. It's cool.
I appreciate it, man. We're having a lot of fun doing it. And when we decided to do it, we looked around the podcast wrestling world and it's like, man, there's podcasts about, all sorts of different wrestling promotions. And there's podcasts about Smoky Mountain and there's podcasts about 80s Memphis wrestling. There's quite a few. I co-host one with Ray Russell. I was like, man, nobody's talking about 90s USWA. I was like, why is that?
Is that right? See, you're telling me stuff I don't know. What's cool is I'm looking forward to my podcast, like you said, that's coming up, because I haven't ever really kept up with all the podcast scene and everything. I've listened to a couple, but I mean, and I've been on maybe one or two, but a lot of people have asked me to be on podcasts and everything, but I was on Jerry Lawler's with him.
Right.
And I think that was the first one, and I think I might have done one more, but that was kind of it. I've just kind of kept my stories to myself.
Well, I'm excited that we're going to get a chance to start telling them, because there's a lot of fun stories. I know I've been getting a lot of emails, and a lot of people are sending in questions and topics they want to hear you talk about, and what we're here to talk about today is one of them. So I guess my first question is, you guys came back into the USWA in early '93. Was it pitched to you and Eddie, hey, why don't you guys have a feud? Or we kind of have a theory, me and my co-host kind of have a theory that you guys might have showed up, looked around the locker room, goes, hey man, why don't we fight each other? Like,
well, you know what? It was kind of a funny thing, which my brother had angles in the USWA with the King, with Jeff, with Brian, which I think I also had angles with all of them. But at the time, the booking and everything, the way everything was leaning, they had talked to us about it, and probably the one that I don't want to say least liked it, but knew I'd have to work harder than anybody else with it was me, because like I said, if you had never worked with my brother before, boy, you had to, I mean, what's the rock say? Just bring it. You better bring everything you've got if you wanted to deal with my brother, because he was freaking something else. I love to work with him. And you was talking about global. I mean, I love to work with him in global. It was great and everything. But you talking about getting in the ring, getting after it. But it was Jerry pitched the idea, but we had looked around, but it was because of the angles that was going on, and there wasn't really anybody for that me or Eddie left for me and Eddie to work with. And I thought, well, come off the global deal and everything, and that was good and all. But man, we had a great time and everything. Like I said, working with my brothers, like guys these days I'd say 70% of them couldn't get in the ring with my brother and go.
I think that's a very fair statement. It's been talked about a lot, and I know we'll talk about it on your podcast a lot in the weeks and months and possibly years to come. But
right.
It's well documented that Eddie, obviously he looked up to your father, but
right.
He also looked up to Jerry Lawler quite a bit, and he patterned a lot of what he did after Jerry Lawler. I know we'll talk about their relationship, how that changed over the years, or how his feelings for Lawler may have changed from when he was watching it to when he was working with him, and that'll be a deep conversations to have, maybe dangerous conversations to have.
I would say definitely so, because I've got some doozies to tell about those stories.
I can only imagine, but I say all that to ask you. I assume, and if I'm wrong, please tell me, but I'm sure you coming up, I know you looked up to your father, but I'm assuming that you probably looked up to Eddie in much the same way that Eddie probably looked up to, the King. Yeah. And so, I know you were looking at this as like, man, I'm gonna have to work hard. This is going to get serious here. But how excited were you to get this opportunity to work with him?
Oh man, I was so excited, because I mean, it made my day if he come back and he thought things was good, because Eddie's logic was it had to be the best. And if it wasn't the best, I mean, he wasn't going to sugarcoat anything. And I mean, if it wasn't perfect and just any little thing was wrong, believe me, he was going to tell you. And I mean, he didn't like it at all because and I mean, we're all, I think, perfectionists, or we try to be if you take pride in what you do. And Eddie took pride in what he done. And like I said, people just don't even realize, which, I was around Eddie my whole life, and from when he started in 79 and I started in 87, from 87 on, we was together in every territory and everything. And I mean, Eddie was just a genius as far as booking, working, and everything. And as far as, I mean, I don't know anybody that he didn't push. And I mean, he worked with the greatest workers that there was during those days.
And that's something we're going to talk about quite a bit in the future too, is the booking mind of Eddie. And from all accounts that I've been told, and you would know this better than anybody, I've always heard that Eddie was a guy who he eat, slept, and breathed wrestling. Like, he got up in the morning talking about booking plans, and
he talked about in the morning. We'd be sitting, we'd come in, we'd be talking about something. All of a sudden, just that subject would go away, and wrestling would be right back. And then we might walk in the door, and wasn't nothing being said, and all of a sudden, listen to this angle, Doug. What do you think? And I mean, it was freaking good. And he was one of the few, which, in the say Eddie Graham, I would say Dusty, but not so much Dusty, but I think maybe a tad Dusty. Eddie would book like 2 months and 3 months out. My brother Eddie would, and everything. And I mean, he would, and doing that though, the only catch with that is sometimes, how the guys were, the boys were, they might not be here in 2 or 3 months, so you have to change things. But I mean, that was the thought that he put in it. And I mean, every day, and like I said, we'd be walking and having a conversation about something, and all of a sudden, the conversation would just change, and he'd say, "I got this idea," and he'd start saying it, and I'd think, where in the world did this come from? But I mean, it would be great stuff, and everything. It was just amazing.
So we'll get into the angle here in just a minute, but kind of along the lines of kind of what we're talking about, while we're kind of putting over USWA here in the beginning, something I think current, like, young guys don't understand in the business, and maybe guys who never got a chance to work that territory, is, most territories, they had TV tapings, and, if things didn't go well, if promos sucked, all right, shoot that again, and they were backstage, and they would, spend all day shooting promos, or even if a match didn't go well, let's just not air that, or let's edit that, or whatever.
Or go out and do it again.
Yeah,
I mean, I've seen different territories do that, and I thought, that's something.
The fans are sitting there like, what's going on? Like, what's happening right now?
What's going on? What are we seeing here?
And even like Vince did, like, there's that famous story where he made Savage and Flair go out and redo a
exactly,
which is wild.
Exactly. Is that not something? I mean, if you think about it, is that not something?
Two of the biggest stars in wrestling at that time. It wasn't like it was in their younger days. I mean, they were in their prime. Like, go back out there and do it again. Like,
but and I mean, what you're doing, like I said, I love the USWA podcast because, I mean, a lot of people like to knock stuff. And like I told you before, man, I don't want to knock anything or anybody. But a lot of people knock the USWA. But then when it come to time for them to draw money and everything, they done exactly what we did when we was in the USWA and everything. So that's kind of a different tell on things, ain't it?
But I don't think guys understand how hard it was. Like, you guys were going out there every Saturday morning on live TV. The matches were live, the promos were live, and you had to draw a crowd. Right. Every Monday night in Memphis, I mean, you had to draw them around the horn in all those different towns. But, we're just speaking on Memphis, that's a challenge.
Right. And you don't think when you walked in the door, I mean, me and Eddie get there a little bit late sometimes, but we was usually later on in the card. But if we pulled up and we seen the cars didn't look good, we'd say, oh, maybe. But I mean, but usually, knock on wood, most of the time, you could tell by our TV what we was going to draw. I mean, if we thought the TV was good, I mean, the people, I mean, that's, you usually could tell, and that's usually what you would draw. I mean, but sometimes we think TV was bad and it would draw good. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's it's a little different, but I mean, usually we had a good feeling for if we thought it was really good, it would draw good. But I mean, and I say really good from the time I started on to the time that it shut down. But now, like when my dad, was when Jarrett took over and everything, I say drawing good, that was selling out and turning away people. But during the different eras, that drawing good changed. But I mean, we was actually, I think, the last territory that was open, and I might be wrong.
Yeah.
I think USWA was the last remaining territory. I mean, other
100%.
besides Vince and WCW.
Absolutely, 100% it was. So, one of the things. So the angle kicks off. You show up for the USWA Tag Team Title Tournament they're doing on TV, and they announced at the beginning of the show that the Gilberts are going to be here, and so many guys are like,
"Hey, that dang Eddie didn't show up, did he?"
And he didn't show up.
Yeah,
he no showed you.
But I'm always the bad guy. What's going on here now?
So you have to team with Tony DiNucci, who had already lost a match in the tournament. So that was already off to a bad start.
Well, I was going to say that should have made me mad, shouldn't it?
Absolutely. And so you and DiNucci wrestle Brian Christopher and Mike Miller. Now we've spent a lot of time on the USWA podcast, putting over Brian Christopher and talking about.
Well, now, hold on. I love Brian. Me and Brian was best friends. I still say Brian's one of my best friends in heaven with my brother and my dad. But now you said another name, Mike Miller. Do you ever talk about him any, or have you heard many stories about him?
Not a lot. That's where I was going with that. I was going because we had some fun watching. So when this kicked off in January, to kind of give you an idea of where things were at in the USWA at the time, and I don't mean this as a knock on Mike Miller, and you may be getting ready to tell me some things that's going to really drive this home. But the big angle for the first show we watched was building towards a Mike Miller versus Jerry Lawler match based off the fact that Mike Miller was drunk at a New Year's Eve party and Lawler ended up knocking him out because he wouldn't leave the party. And that was the whole premise of the main event at the Coliseum that Monday night, with Lawler and Miller based off of New Year's Eve party fight.
Boy, we was looking for angles then, wasn't we?
Yes, and I told them guys, because we picked 93 because they're like, well, this will probably be easy to get an audience for because you got all these WWF guys coming through, and there's some interesting stuff. But when we started, and me and the co-host watch it, and afterwards like, man, I thought you said 93 was good. I'm like, we got to get there. I'm like, these first few weeks are a little rough. I'm like, man, when you got Mike Miller in the main event, it's hard times, as Dusty Rhodes would say. So,
hey, there you go. It was funny, but hey, what I was going to say is Mike's a great guy. I mean, he was great. A story, and you would laugh at this, which, like I said, me and Brian, we was always best friends. I mean, we'd do everything together and everything. We worked against each other for about 2 years straight, every night and everything, and everything. But I love Brian and everything. But we was coming back from Evansville one night. Bill Dundee was in his Mercedes, and Bill Dundee, Mike Miller, me and Brian, and they was agging, instigating on, and they was saying that night they was saying something about what was it? Who was going to win? Who was going to go over? I said, can't none of you beat me if I don't want you to. And which I was just playing, right? Yeah. Well, we get started back, and Bill and Mike start saying, I think Bill would say, Doug, I think you beat him. Mike say, no, Brian, he can't beat you, can he? And they agged, so we wound up, which me and Brian was best with each other. And Brian said, pull the car over. That Bill whipped that car over. You'd laughed over that Mike Miller. He was looking at us and everything. And we got out and we rode around a little bit in the grass. And Brian, he had at that point had Coke bottle glasses. You couldn't see very well, but he wound up getting LASIX and got all that straight. But when we got out of the car, got out of the Mercedes, and we rolled around the grass a little bit, and then we got in and we was just working them. And but Brian put his glasses on the trunk of that Mercedes. But when we got in and left and started back, Brian said, "Where's my glasses?" I said,
Oh no.
I don't know where your glasses. He left them on the trunk of the car. That cost him about $700-800. But me and him trying to play and rib them, we wound up ribbing himself. But Mike is a super nice fella, and I mean, I always heard the stories about he was really over in Portland. Now, you probably know more about the history of Portland. Now, I don't know any history about Portland. I went to Portland like once and just worked at a show, but not during the heyday or nothing. It was just me and Dennis Condry went up there and worked in Portland one time.
Yeah. He was a big star in Portland, and honestly, I had forgotten that he had even came to Memphis, and he came a couple of different times, but I had forgot that he was here in this era. But it's just, they did some funny stuff with him. You know, they did the deal where, you know, Lauren Davenport and Leslie Ballinger were fighting over him. And he's like, I'm man enough for both of them. And he's like, you know.
Hey, he was just a cool dude. He made me laugh. And I mean, he was funny, but he was a tough dude too. I mean, but in those days, like when he started, and like I said, you know, my dad, when Eddie started, you had to be tough. I mean, I'm like I said, I'm not knocking anyone, but I mean, during those days, 70 to 80%, maybe more than that, wouldn't have never got in the business. I mean, that's you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, we talk. You know, we've talked Brian up a lot because I've always said, and that's one of the motivations behind this podcast too. Is like, man, anybody who only knows, like, if you didn't live in the Memphis area or anywhere in that TV viewing area, if you only know Grandmaster Sexay Brian Christopher, if you didn't get to see heel Brian Christopher in Memphis, like in this era and even up through the 90s, I mean, you didn't see the best of Brian. I mean, that character was great, and it served its purpose in WWF for that kind of quote-unquote entertainment.
Right.
But that wasn't the best use of Brian. I mean, he was such – and you can speak on this, I'm sure. I mean, I was around Brian on quite a few shows over the years. I got to know him a little bit. Not real great. But, even his best friends in the world, like I said, I'm sure you're probably getting ready to co-sign this when I say this, is like, no matter how much you loved Brian – he could get under people's skin like nobody else, like even behind the scenes. But he could bring that on camera and use it to his advantage.
Yeah, but I mean, Brian was living his gimmick. I mean, and he done it as good as anybody, which everybody always told me Savage was one of the best as far as, always staying in character, but Brian would stay in character. But I mean, like when me and him would, when we'd leave the building, we'd go to the hotels and stay and everything. You're going to laugh. I mean, everybody wants to say Brian was so wild and this and that. Me and him would leave the Louisville Gardens, Evansville, and we'd go to the hotel. We'd sit and play video games. Boy, we was really wild guys, wasn't we? And that's what some guys asked me at Louisville. Said, "Well, we didn't ever see you and Brian out." There was a place called the Toy Tiger. Said, "You and Brian wouldn't never come out." I said, "Well, we had a good time, but we just kind of done things different than everybody else did." But I mean, but all you hear is the stories of, "Oh, Brian was so wild," and this and that. And I mean, everybody in their day, and when it changes, and when you go and you're around different people, I mean, you change and stuff and everything. But man, like I said, I love Brian to this day. Man, me and him was like, I mean, he was probably him, Eddie, Tommy Rich, and Brian, Buddy Landell. That's my guys.
Memphis Mafia.
That's the Memphis Mafia all day.
Hell yeah. But yeah, I am happy to use both of these podcasts, both the USWA podcast and yours as well, to help tell stories about Brian and let people know, what a great guy and what a talented guy he was if they don't know already.
Well, that's what I mean. And I told somebody told me, said, "Oh, you got to tell bad stories," and they want to hear bad stuff. I said, "Man, I've got so much freaking good stuff that I think people would like, and everything that I mean." And everybody wants to tell. They say, "Well, bad stuff gets ratings," and there's a few people, and I'm not even going to mention their names, that that only comes on podcasts or their stuff and talks bad about people and cusses people. What good does that do? Look, there is so much good in wrestling that people will never hear. I mean, what about us going up and down the roads and having great times, and us in the ring with people that could work, and us having great matches? And I'm talking about, and the deal with Brian, like I said, me and Brian worked together about 2 years straight, just almost every night. I mean, me and him never talked about wrestling. I mean, that's what, and people couldn't believe it. Like these days, I mean, with people sitting and going over matches for an hour or something, me and him, I mean, we'd ride in the car and everything, but we wouldn't even talk about, I mean, we might say, did you see that or something, if something was god awful or something, but as far as me and him talking about something we was going to do, you know, I mean, there'd be a finish, but that was basically it.
If you had to guess, I mean, I know you don't know an actual number, but if you just had to guess, because somebody speculated this in the comments of one of the videos I posted, but if you had to just take a wild guess of how many matches you and Brian had over the years, what would you think it would probably be? I mean, it's in the hundreds, right? I mean,
I'd say four to 500.
I would think so.
And I mean, I think something, but and you know, the kicker is, like you was talking about, people don't know like how Brian was and everything. I mean, I was with, you know, if they didn't know him from the USWA days, well, this is like you remember Hootie and the Blowfish, Darius Rucker, right?
Right.
A guy introduced Lawler to him and said, "This is the king in the WWF," and Darius Rucker said, "No, this is the king of Memphis." And see, that shows what you're talking about Brian during those days, like that. Darius knew Lawler from CWA and from USWA and everything, and to me, that's what's cool. I mean, that's the legacy, and that's what I'm saying. It's cool you doing the USWA podcast and everything. That's really, like I said, that's mine. I've been kind of all over the world, not bragging or for sure not putting our stuff over or nothing, but USWA, just I was comfortable there, and it was, you know, it was really cool times and really great people to work with.
So,
but now I got fired about a dozen times from there, though.
I'm sure we'll hear some of those stories. You know, it's not all going to be sunshine and rainbows. This ain't going to be a negative podcast, but there's going to be some stories where sometimes, you know,
well, shoot,
got to talk about some things, but it's all right.
Hey, like I said, it ain't nothing about talking bad about it, but I'll tell the truth. I mean, I ain't got nothing to hide. And the good thing is, I mean, I don't know that, that I would change too much that I did. I mean, I probably should maybe, but it is what it is. And man, it's been a good life for my family. I mean, as far as Eddie sure passed away too young, but I mean, when he was with us and everything, I mean, my dad was freaking super tough. My brother was super tough, and I'd never be tough as either one of them. And my dad was a great wrestler that wrestled like, you know, when they bring Luthias in here, my dad wouldn't be, you know, I mean, they'd have somebody else for the king and somebody else for Bill, and my dad would wrestle Theas, and I thought that was cool and stuff. And and everything. But
Tommy Gilbert wasn't a sports entertainer; he was a professional wrestler. So,
well, that's what
I mean. Like, he could do the entertainment later on. But
well, that's what Jerry Jarrett told me. He was one of 5 people that he had to thank for his success. And I said, "Is that right?" And he said, "Yeah." And he told me that like 2 or 3 different times. He said, "You know, your dad is one of my guys." He said he went with me, and he was what he needed as far as, you know, at that time, as far as a wrestler, like a wrestler. And he had Lawler. He said Lawler, my dad, Eddie Marlin, and it was 2 more, which I'll think of it and tell you that later. But I mean, I thought that was really cool.
That is. And, you know, I've been doing, you know, I've been studying on you guys for years, but I've been especially doing some research, and we decided we was going to do this podcast, you know, and based on when your dad started his career and the fact that you're still involved now, the Gilbert legacy in wrestling is like 55 years, like, half a century in the wrestling business. That's pretty awesome.
I was fixing to say my dad started in 68 or 60, I think 69. And I was born 2 days before 69. So, I mean, wrestling's been going on before I was born. So that tells you something and everything. But anyway, no, it's been a cool, like I said, the USWA stuff, I love all of it. I mean, you can ask me whatever you want, but like working with my brother, oh man, that was freaking great. And I thought the angle was good and everything. And it's just a blast. Me sitting here is just making me think back about it and everything. I mean, and two, if you watch, which I don't know if y'all got to the weeks that I'm talking about, but some of the interviews that he done and talked about me, I freaking laughed. I couldn't help but to laugh. I thought anybody else would get mad, but I laughed. I thought they was so funny.
Those were such good. All the promos were really good, and they weren't wrestling promos. They were promos that two brothers would cut on each other. Right. Whether you were having a match at the Mid-South Coliseum or there's two brothers finna throw down in the backyard because you had a disagreement, it's the shit you would talk to each other, right? I mean,
and you know what? How did we do that? Now it takes 4 people or 5 people to tell somebody what to say to make something. That's what. But I mean, I want everybody to do good. That's what I'm saying. I mean, I've got friends that's still bosses, WWE, friends in AEW that's still bosses, and I want all of them to do well, but it just kind of shocks me that everything goes in cycles. I mean, everything in life goes in cycles, and we used to say, I mean, which it still does as far as wrestling goes in cycles for years. I mean, we'd say you'd have 4 to 5 good years, and you might have a down year or two, but then 4 or 5 good years and a down year or two. But I mean, that's just kind of the way it was.
My wife was in the room when I was watching some of those episodes, and she was with me in Jonesboro. I'm a terrible husband. I don't think I ever introduced you to we were sitting across from each other for like 6 hours that day, and I don't think I ever actually introduced her to you. But anyway, she was watching those shows, and it was the promo where Eddie was doing the promo. It was like, Doug would jump off the house, Superman, and she's like, you got to ask him the first episode you do, is any of those stories remotely true? And I'm like, oh, believe me, I will.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to tell you what, if I did, it was because he talked me into it. He could talk me into anything, but I mean, he was telling the truth about going down in the den and us wrestling. Cause I'd go jump, I mean, from me being such, 9 years younger than Eddie and everything. And I mean, seeing my dad, and like, I was the only one, like Eddie knew, my dad wouldn't get in until 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning from the road and everything. And him and my sister would be real quiet and everything. Not me. I'd go run, jump in the room and just jump on him in the bed. And one time I done that though, and just out of instinct, I guess, he slung his arm like this, and I was a little bitty boy, and I went off the bed. But they knew better than me anyway. But yeah, but if I ever done anything, it's because he egged me on or got me to do it. But that's what I laughed about that stuff, and I thought there was great promos.
The bear down promo, like
now that was
because I had a little brother who ironically was 9 years younger than me, and oddly enough, he passed away this past January of a massive heart attack out of nowhere. But he was 9 years younger than me.
Sorry,
I appreciate it, man. But we had the same amount of years difference between us as you guys did, except I was the older brother. And he used to do that to me. We loved wrestling. We grew up watching it, and he would, he would get a little wild, and every once in a while, you had to kind of, all right. And then when Eddie did that in promo, I was like, oh man, I know there's some reality to this promo because I've lived that, So
right.
I was like,
but now I'm gonna tell you, you was talking about working with Eddie, and like I said, I mean, man, it was such a joy as far as to come back from the ring, and him to just say, man, that was good, or that was pretty good, and because the two that I saw do that more than anybody was him and Lawler. I would watch their matches and I would
Mhm.
think it was great. And then they'd come back with somebody and whoever they was working with come and they'd say, everything all right? They'd just say, oh, it was pretty good. Or it was okay. Nothing was ever
Yeah.
great or it was very seldom that it was said that was good and
Yeah.
everything. And that's because I mean they took so much pride in what they're doing, which I think we all did. But they was great at what they done and everything. I mean that was sticking point in it.
So I got to ask you about this. Over the years, you were Doug Gilbert, and then eventually you were Hitman Doug Gilbert, you were Dirty Doug Gilbert, and eventually land on Dangerous Doug Gilbert, and that's when it clicked. Like that's who this guy is.
Right.
But there's a lesser remembered short-term version of Doug Gilbert that not everybody remembers, but we saw in this feud. And so when you returned to USWA in '93, I had forgotten about this until we started watching this. And Josh Briley. So one of my co-hosts, I'll mention this here. You might appreciate this. So Josh Briley, one of my co-hosts, is actually the nephew of Nightmare Danny Davis.
Is that right?
Yeah, so he's a huge wrestling fan. He grew up around it and watching it, so he remembers all this stuff. So when you came out,
was he from Was he from Jackson also? Danny
Yeah.
and his mom was from Jackson, and
still there now.
And you're gonna laugh. I was just talking to a person yesterday about Danny Davis. They said, I said, Danny doing okay? And they said, yeah. He said his biggest worry right now, he's trying to figure out when he wants to leave to go on a motorcycle ride to Indianapolis. And I said, well, then he don't have any worries. And what he's living in Florida now and everything.
Yeah.
Danny was always great to guys like myself and Brian. I mean, he was. I mean, if you go back like with Danny and myself and my brother, as far as go, way back as far as when my brother started with Danny, but me as far as like Continental, I worked programs with him there and everything. They called me, which this is another one that you might know, but everybody else wouldn't. But they called me Nightmare Freddy. I was one of the nightmares with which Danny was Nightmare and Ken was Nightmare, and my brother brought me in as a Nightmare, and I was under the hood, which both of them wasn't under the hoods. It's just when they painted the star on their face and everything. Yeah. But Danny was always really good to me. I worked a program with him down there, and he was always. I mean, he was a great worker. And here's the thing about Danny too: people look at him and think, well, he ain't that big. Danny, didn't nobody want to mess with Danny. I mean, Danny was a tough cookie.
So I'm in Alabama now, but I grew up in Aberdeen, Mississippi, which was right smack in the middle between Tupelo and Columbus. So I got WMC so I could watch all the Memphis wrestling, but we also got Continental. And those are my two favorite. Like everybody loved WWF and NWA, WC, but my two favorite things was Memphis and Continental. So I was a huge Danny Davis fan back then. And I would go to the Continental shows in Columbus. And so I remember you being there. I remember, during that time when Eddie was booking and you were Nightmare Freddy. And
was you actually in Columbus the night Eddie worked against Jerry Stubbs and they went like 58 minutes or they wound up, I think they might have went 60 minutes one time, but they had a hair against mask or something, like Eddie's hair against the mask or belt against the mask or something. And Eddie beat Jerry Stubbs, but they went like 58 minutes and Jerry had two hoods on.
Yeah.
You remember Jerry, Mr. Olympia, right?
Oh yeah, love that guy
and everything. Awesome. And people have called me and wrote me stuff that had been at those shows and said, man, that was some of the best stuff that I've ever seen. And I love Jerry Stubbs. He helped me so much as far as I worked a program with him in Continental. And all I'd do is I had so much respect for him was I would just listen to him because I was such a young guy and everything. And he was such a great worker. And I mean, I tell everybody to this day, when I guess I would have been about 12, 13, somewhere in there, my dad was working in Pensacola for the Armstrongs and Fullers and everything. And I went down there one summer and the best tag team or one of the best tag teams I have still ever seen to this day was Jerry Stubbs and Arn Anderson.
Yes.
And it was before Arn was Arn. He was Marty Lund or whatever. But man, you talking about it was during what year would that have been? Where's the beef? The Wendy's one. Remember Where's the
Yeah,
beef
it was like
commercial?
84, I think, in there. 84, 85, somewhere in that.
No, it could have
Or
been.
was it before that?
It had to be way before that because I
80,
graduated in 87. That had been
so it would have been
80,
82 or 3.
82 probably maybe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, because by
everything.
85, Arn was already up in the Carolinas. So, yeah, this would have been 82, 83.
Yeah,
Like
but they was together, and man, you talking about a freaking tag team. I watched their match when I, go every night with my dad when I was down there, and I thought, man, this is a freaking good tag team, and they was really. And then Arn went on, and Jerry never did. And I thought, dang, Jerry should have went on. And I mean, what a worker that Jerry was. When I wrestled matches with him, I wouldn't open my mouth. And then one night, I got in the ring with him, and I said, he wouldn't say nothing. I said, Jerry, what do you want me to do? He said, I'm not saying nothing. And I said, you're not saying nothing, because we didn't call nothing in the back or nothing or anything. He said, no. He said, kid, you call this. And you talking about, I about started shaking. Then I thought, oh my goodness, but it was just the respect deal. And I mean, Jerry was such a good worker.
By all accounts, from what I've always heard, and I've had a chance to talk to him a couple of times, that Jerry had opportunities to go to like Crockett and different places, but he was just content. He liked
in
that
Florida,
territory, hanging out on the beach, and then you could drive to the towns and be back in bed that same night.
Well, I know how he feels because that's the exact same way I feel about the USWA. I mean, and everything, which people might say I'm crazy, and this wasn't Florida, but it was, you know what I'm saying? It was the same deal. I mean, but Jerry he was a great worker. And like I said, people have sent me stuff about his and Eddie's matches and everything. And I remember watching, and I thought, man, this is something, because they went, but I laughed when Jerry come back. He was breathing. And Jerry was in great shape. You couldn't blow Jerry up. Well, that sun gun was about blowed up that night because he had two masks on, and they went about 58 minutes. And Eddie, he put Eddie over, but then when he took the mask off, he had the other mask on, and the people went crazy because of, they didn't, and everything. But it was really cool.
And he had to be burning up because those Mr. Olympia masks were screened in and they were closed off.
Exactly, and that's what the boys were saying. Is your brother pulling a rib on Jerry? I said, no. I said, he's not. He's just having a match, the best match. And like I said, they went like 58 minutes. And I thought, man, but that Jerry, he was really good. But I guess that got us off what we was talking about.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up because this episode, we've already had a pretty long interview with Bob Smith, who had a lot to talk about. So,
well, now what's old Bob Smith doing? Who's that? Should I know him?
He was the managing editor of Pro Wrestling Illustrated for years. He always loved Memphis. He was one of the guys from New York that really championed Memphis and made sure that you guys got coverage in the magazines. And he was actually on an episode in 1991, so we talked to him about that.
Well, shoot, I better thank Bob Smith then, hadn't I?
Yeah, absolutely. He was very excited when I told him about your podcast coming up. He was excited about it and said he looked forward to listening to it. And he's got his Outdated Wrestling Hour podcast that he does every week. And I was a guest on it, and we promoted your podcast on there as well. So,
well, I sure just cut you off about saying the Nightmare Freddy deal, and you had a different character, but I guess we can talk about that one later, can't we?
Well, we need to go ahead and touch on that real quick because I promised people we would get there. Or is that going to be a long one? Do we need to save that to the first episode of Dangerous Conversations?
Oh, it's a long one, and you might shake your head or scratch your head, and everybody I think will probably scratch their head.
All right, so a teaser, folks, to make sure that you listen to the first episode of Dangerous Conversations. There's so much great stuff that we can talk to Doug about involving his career and Eddie's career and his father's career. There's so many things people have been emailing me and messaging me. People want to hear about the hit and run angle in the parking lot of TV5, which is a great story.
Hey.
I've heard your version. I've heard Eddie's version. I've heard a bunch of other people's version when I was working on that book. What a wild story. I can't wait to talk to you about that. And then, so many other things. But we're going to talk about where and how the King of Rock and Roll came about, because it was a side of Doug Gilbert none of us has ever seen, and me and the guys have been like getting a kick out because them last couple episodes, you're like, man, he is leaning hard into this King of Rock and Roll. Like,
hey, it was a side of Doug Gilbert that I've never seen.
So we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, but that will definitely be some heavy. You, like I said, you'll scratch your head and laugh, and a lot of people think, "How in the world did that come about?" And when I tell you, y'all are probably going to laugh and say that's the wrestling business.
So we're going to talk about that. We'll finish up the angle with you and Eddie because it led to a loser leave town match. We'll talk about how that played out, who left town, and what happened with the guy who didn't leave town, who ended up leaving town shortly thereafter. We'll talk about how that came about as well.
Well, I was fixing to say, I think I'm the only person that, let's see, did I ever win a loser leave town match? And I think I'm the only person that has, now, and you're a historian, you know more about this than me, but I got to think about this the other day. I think I'm the only person that has not been the ones in a hair match that wind up getting my head shaved. Wouldn't you say that? You don't know of anybody else that's happened to, do you?
I just can't think of any off the top of my head. It was one of my random questions I was going to ask you. Was like, I asked you how many matches you had with Brian Christopher.
Well,
but how many hair matches you've lost? I've seen numerous ones just recently.
Well, I'll say this. On TV, it was Jerry Lawler, the King versus Too Sexy, and they're in a hair match. In some way, I'm the one that gets his head shaved, but I will come in the ring and we've got that. I've got that on something, the whole match of that, and that's funny. I mean, but I thought the other day I was thinking about something. Somebody had asked me different questions. Is there anything that's ever happened to me that I don't think has happened to any other wrestler? Which, so much stuff happens. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, there's almost everything duplicated. And I thought, well, I don't know of any wrestler that wasn't in the hair match that wound up getting his head shaved and the people being happy and leaving, without, like the time that Lawler and Valiant had the hair match in Memphis and nobody got their head shaved and they busted the windows out at the deal. That was wound up being a bad deal. But this deal made the people happy at Memphis at TV when Brian was wrestling King and everything. And I come out and I nailed one of them and put the other one on, and they wind up getting up, and I wind up being the one. But that was kind of cool.
Which tells you that you're doing your job. If you getting your head shaved makes them happy enough, they forget that, hey, neither one of the guys we were supposed to see get his head shaved got their head shaved. Wait a minute.
And that's the two top guys in the whole territory. I mean, as far as so that's I thought that was kind of cool.
Well, all right, Doug, we appreciate you coming on the USWA podcast, and I can't tell you how excited I am to get started with Dangerous Conversations, and we're about to get that going here real soon, folks, and tonight was just a little bit of a tease of what you can expect, and as you can see, Doug's not going to hold anything back. He's going to tell us what happened and why and where, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it.
No, Gene, if you've got it, what's cool, you've got a lot of, I like your questions and everything, and you hear from everybody else. And if they've got questions, we'll answer them and talk about them and try to work them out and tell you what actually. But like I said, I mean, there's so much cool stuff. I mean, everybody's not going to be negative, but there's so much cool stuff and fun stuff that was done that nobody ever hears about. And I mean, like I said, all my friends, and like I told you, all the bunch that was in the Memphis Mafia, plus I got a ton more friends and everything. But I mean, there's stories, and I just, Terry Funk told me one time we was in Japan together, and he said, Dougie, I'm not going to write a book. I'm going to carry all of my stories to the grave. And then all of a sudden I seen he wrote about 3 books or something. I thought, well, dang, Terry sure didn't do what he said, but I laughed. And I thought, but when he was telling me that, I thought, think of the stories that he had the stories that from my dad's, from me
Yeah.
being 5 years old, going with my dad till now and everything. But hey, listen, thanks, G, for having me on and everything. And I won't hold you up, but
no problem. And folks, if you have a question for Doug, if you have a topic you want covered, you can send it to this email, DougGilbertPodcast@outlook.com, and I will make sure that it makes it onto the show eventually. We got a lot of stuff to cover. I can't promise it's going to be the very first episode, because we're going to try to keep these to an hour to 90 minutes. I mean, we know you ain't got 6 hours a week to sit down and watch these things. Me and Doug don't have 6 hours a week to sit down and do them.
Well,
but
I was fixing to say, I can't turn on anybody anymore, can I? I turned on 2 or 3 people there in 93, did I?
yeah, you'll go away for a while and then you'll come back, and then like you said, I don't know if it was of your own accord or someone else's, but you always find your way back, and that's what's awesome. So thank you, folks, for listening, and we will catch you next week for another episode of the USWA podcast. And check the Facebook Doug Gilbert Podcast, facebook.com/Doug Gilbert Podcast, to find out when this new podcast will be debuting. It's going to be really soon, because we said August, and guess what? Tomorrow's August, so
hey, be cool, everybody.
Hey, folks, before we get out of here, I'd just like to take a moment to tell you we appreciate you checking out the podcast. And if you would, do us a favor, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you're listening to this right now, wherever you're watching it. If you'll just take a moment to either subscribe, to rate, and review, let us know what you think. We hope you're liking it, but even if you're not, let us know what you would like to see changed, and we will take that into consideration as we move forward. So we really appreciate any feedback we can get. Also, we just want to say how proud we are to be a part of the WrestleCopia brand of wrestling podcast. Ray Russell brings you something for everyone over at WrestleCopia.com. Check out all the great wrestling podcasts available over there right now. And for all things related to the Retro Wrestling Review Podcast, you can go to USWAPodcast.com, and you can find links to everything we have there: our Facebook, our Twitter/X, our TikTok, our Instagram, our merch store. That's right. We've got shirts, we've got hats, we've got phone cases, we've got all kinds of great stuff. And it's all right there at our store. And you can find a link to it at USWAPodcast.com. There's a link to the YouTube channel we're associated with, the Retro Wrestling Archive. You can find all that there. And if you have questions for us, if you saw something on the show that you have a question about or a comment about, if you've got some info to answer a question we have, or you had a question you want us to read on the air, if you want to work out an ad swap, if you want to have any kind of communication with us, you can go and send an email to USWAPodcast@outlook.com, and I will get back to you just as quickly as humanly possible.